Big time fight at women's flyweight. We have Jojo, Joanne Calderwood, coming up against Evil Eye, Jessica Eye, and Matt. Well, Jessica Eye might not be a fan favorite. I will say this. At 135 and 125, she's been there against some of the best women in the world. Unfortunate for her, the way that her title bid went at 125 pounds against Valentina Shevchenko. But she lost that fight. She beats Viviane Araújo. She loses her last one to Cynthia Calvillo in a main event where Calvillo looked great. Calvillo looked really good. That was Calvillo's night, and her wrestling really did a lot and caused a lot of problems for Jessica and really kind of stifled her on the feet, too, because we saw Calvillo have a lot of success in that one.
Put a couple zeros in my bank account that night, too.
For Joanne Calderwood, if you look at her last five, it's weird. She beats Kalindra Faria 2.5 years ago by submission. You're not hearing a lot about Kalindra anymore.
I was a low-key fan back in the day. I can't lie.
She beats Ariane Lipski. She had that great win over Luana Carolina, but that's been about it for her in the UFC. She got a big contract after that one, too. Weird. She loses to Caitlin Chookagian. She beats Andrea Lee by split decision, and then she was in a title eliminator where she probably should have waited a little bit, but didn't. Took on Jennifer Maia. I remember the prediction video as clear as mud when we went to kind of break that one down, and I want to say we both had Calderwood to win that one.
Oh, we did. Quite confidently as well.
Quite confidently in the stand-up. Well, Jennifer Maia beat her bad and made her look kind of slow. And I talked about clear as mud. It almost looked like Joanne Calderwood kind of missed a step in that fight, and it was just a weird one for her there. Again, both of these women are not young in their career, and that's the weird thing, because if you look it up, and I put the graphic up there, they didn't start fighting until the 2010s. Joanne Calderwood, 35 years of age. Jessica Eye, 34. That's kind of just the place that this division is. And we saw Calderwood, when she kind of made a full-time transition to 25, she looked really good.
She did.
For Jessica Eye moving from bantamweight to flyweight, she looked really good too. So it's just an interesting matchup that we have here. I don't really know as far as title implications that this fight really has, but we are up there on the cusp of the upper end of this division. So overall, it is an interesting matchup, and it does hold pretty major implications for the division.
It does, and it's an interesting fight because you have two people who at one time were thought of as top contenders. Of course, I fought for the title, and Calderwood probably should have been fighting for the title. Don't know who her manager is, but laid an egg on that one. Calderwood, I was always really high on her, and she was always one of those fighters. I don't have a good read on Joanne Calderwood. I can admit that right now. I always think she's better than she really is. I had the opposite problem with Stipe. Like, I never think Stipe's as good as he really is, even though I understand, like, Stipe's one of the greatest fighters ever. But for Calderwood, like, in my mind, she's got great Muay Thai, and I always think of the inaugural women's flyweight fight. And you're probably thinking, what, was that on The Ultimate Fighter? No, there was one women's flyweight fight all the way back at UFC Ottawa.
Valerie Letourneau, I mean, the Canadian.
Craig out here stealing my thunder before I could say it. So she fights Valerie Letourneau, and she not only fights Valerie Letourneau, knocks her over with a spinning back fist in the third round. Like, it was an extremely impressive performance in that fight, and it was in...
A lot of Canadian connections in that fight,
A lot of Canadian connections.
TriStar at the time.
So for Calderwood, she has really good stand-up, and we've seen a lot of the shortcomings in her ground game, and I'll be honest, I don't think anyone's shooting for a takedown in this fight. Jessica Eye might, if she's noticing that if Calderwood can get into those clinch positions, that's her best spot by far. She's got really great elbows coming over the top. She's really good at getting her opponent against the cage and making them pay for it. And you brought up the Andrea Lee fight. That was her last win. Yes, it's a split decision. She beat Andrea Lee quite badly in that fight. She was able to enact her game plan of, I'm going to get you to the cage and I'm going to unload on you. And Andrea Lee has that great lateral movement. Calderwood's good at cutting off the cage, and that's something that even high-low fighters do struggle with that. It's one of those sort of... It's been lost, I guess, really, in MMA as a whole. Calderwood's really good at forcing her opponent back to the cage, and Jessica Eye, she's got a weird boxing style, and I'm going to bring up a name that we probably talk about her too much. She's got a little Cindy Dandois-esqueness to her, where... It's not that my striking is good. It's just that it's a frustrating style. I am going to be throwing punches constantly, and it's a case of you're not going to want to get hit by them, but it's not going to ruin your career if you do get hit by them. Like, Calderwood is the better striker, I would say, but the fact that Jessica Eye can just frustrate her with her volume might mean that I could win a decision on the feet.
We got the fight wrong on the Holloway Cater card, but you did bring up the Cindy Dandois in the fact that Vanessa Mello, when she took on Sarah Morris, what's Vanessa Mello going to do? Keep her arms out there and strike. What happened? Vanessa Mello kept her arms out there and struck, and Sarah Morris decided to go Maria Sharapova on it and just yell and back up and not wrestle, which he's good at,
and raise her
Mello's
hands
bad at.
even though she lost.
So in that fight, again, you had one person that didn't want to engage, and Vanessa Mello did, and it was a lot of single shots, but she won that fight. These two fighters are A, much more high level, and B, will engage. So I expect them more to kind of crash in the middle. Jessica Ai is not one to be on her back foot. You talk about the boxing. If you look on Tapology, they're about 3 years behind in the fact that they still have strong style fight team as Jessica Ai's gym. She's been in Vegas for a long time now. And Joanne Calderwood out of Syndicate, the John Wood connection there, she's been there for quite some time too, training with the likes of, who do you want to rattle off? Serena De Jesus, Roxanne Modafferi. We can go on and on and on. They have a lot of good fighters.
Buddy who slammed Matt Wyman? I forget his name. Great knockout.
Jordan Levitt.
Thank you.
Jordan Levitt. So, yeah, they do have a lot of good fighters at Syndicate, too. And in the area, there's a lot of good fighters. But for Joanne Calderwood, again, the last 3 fights have been weird because you lose the decision to Caitlin Chukagian. Well, what does Caitlin Chukagian minus that one fight against Antonina Shevchenko do well?
Awesome. Going backwards.
It's a lot of volume. The Antonina fight, she became a wrestler. She wins the fight against Andrea Lee, and again, you talked about it. She won that fight, even though it's a split decision. Andrea Lee's been on a weird run of losing lately, which you just don't expect out of her. And in that Maya fight, there was a layoff, and then she was supposed to get the title fight, but she didn't, so she fought anyway. And just like when Frankie Edgar should have just waited a little bit longer, Calderwood lost. So she's in a weird spot. For again, Shevchenko, Araujo, Calvillo. That Araujo's the fight to point to because we talked about it in Viviani's fight against Roxanne Modafferi. And you could be watching it before that fight happens. We could look like geniuses. Or B, you watch it after and we're totally wrong. But Jessica Ai was able to kind of disrupt the flow of Araujo, and she looked really good in that one. And if she fights like that in this fight, I think she'd be able to get a win there.
I agree 100%. There's going to be a lot of 50-50 exchanges in this fight. And I'm going to sound condescending, but I really don't mean it this way. If you don't know what that means, in a lot of fights, you will just see every time both of them do meet for an exchange, they're just both landing pretty much the same level of strikes. And then you look at Holloway-Cater, for instance, and Holloway's perfect. And I'm going to hit you, then I'm going to get out of the way, then I'm going to hit you again. We're not going to see a lot of that out of these two. It's going to be a lot of both them throwing at the same time, and I do just kind of see it that way for 15 minutes. Neither one's going to go for a takedown. I know we've seen more of a wrestling style, if you will, from Calderwood as of late. Not that it's in her style, but she will shoot for more takedowns, at least in this stage of her career. I just don't see her being able to actually secure the takedown against someone like Jessica Ai. And for Jessica Ai, again, I'm kind of the opposite with Ai that I am with Calderwood. I always think too highly of Calderwood. I'm going to be the first person to tell you right now, I don't know where to put Jessica Ai's skill set in the 125-pound division, because you think, okay, you lose to Valentina, no shame in that, arguably the women's GOAT, and then you beat Araujo, oh wow, like you're back, and you beat a top contender, and then you lose to Cynthia Calvillo, who, I gotta be honest, like that fight wasn't that good. Calvillo won it, but it wasn't a fact of Calvillo just looked like this absolute world beater at 125. It was, this is a lower level main event, and Jessica Ai's coming off a title fight, so you can have her be one half of the main event.
Title fight loss, then a win.
Exactly. So for title implications, you could kind of get away with making that a main event. I just don't see Jessica Ai as that main event caliber fighter, and not to say I see the same for Calderwood. I just like some of the strikes of Calderwood more. I think if she can avoid the 50-50 exchanges of Ai, if she can get Ai up against the cage, you're going to be able to avoid a lot of the fire, but coming back your way. Struggling with my words right there. You can avoid a lot of those punches coming back your way, because for Ai, again, she's so boxing heavy. You're not going to see kicks. You won't even really see leg kicks out of her. She's got that very unique, she's a very wide style or stance for a boxer. She will keep her legs very wide apart and try to lean into a lot of her shots to accentuate the power. The issue is she doesn't have a lot of power to begin with, so I don't see that being what puts her over the edge to become like a knockout artist at 125.
The nice thing with Ai, and you talked about it really early on, the fact that she cuts the cage really well, and you hear that at the highest level of MMA, and you might hear it at the lower level, but in the reverse, where so-and-so is chasing fighter X.
Well, the Sarah Morris fight.
They're always chasing. The Sarah Morris fight against Vanessa Mello, which was just a weird one. Jessica Ai, really good at getting that lead leg out there, cutting off the cage, landing her combinations, back up, back in, back up, back in. She has really good movement. Calderwood on her back foot, she does do a good job of circling away from power. She does a great job there, and you talked about it, the 50-50 matchups. And both of these women have extensive UFC careers, so you can take the stats with a grain of salt. Joanne Calderwood lands a lot more, but she gets into those firefights in the middle a lot more too. So you might see the striking advantage or disadvantage. It definitely goes by way of Joanne Calderwood when compared to Jessica Ai. Also take into account Jessica Ai took a lot of damage in the fight against Valentina and got finished. And in terms of the grappling, maybe a slight edge in terms of the number to Joanne Calderwood. Probably wouldn't expect it in this fight, but if you did, maybe more so at a Calderwood than you would at a Jessica Ai. So overall, a very interesting fight. In terms of the Tapology votes, 689 of them, 77% going Calderwood, 86% have her to win by decision. If we have a look at the odds here, Matt, got to flip my paper. Jessica I open to plus 120. She's now minus 105, still an underdog. For Calderwood, open minus 140. She's now at a minus 119. That gap is closing and the money's coming in on I. How do you see this one here?
I never thought I'd pick Jessica in another fight. I think Jessica is going to be able to get this done. I do, and I do think it's going to come down a lot to those 50-50 exchanges where I don't know if the judges just see something in her that they don't in other fighters, but a lot of her fights do go to split decisions, and she does fight close fights no matter who she fights. She'll fight to the level of her competition, and sometimes that's a good thing. Like in the Araujo fight, she really showed that I'm more than just this sort of basic boxer type. Whereas Calderwood, we can see the wrestling of her sometimes, but she'll wrestle herself into exhaustion every now and then. And her striking, she's good offensively moving forward, but there is a bit of a weakness on the back foot, like you had mentioned. She does do a good job of circling, but the issue is she can be held up against the cage herself. And I would kind of argue that is a strength for both of them. They can both cut off the cage. They're both decent defensively, but I'm going to side with Jessica. I do think she'll just get the slight advantage in some of the exchanges. And for the odds being this close, I don't mind going with the underdog.
If Joanne Calderwood brings a full game set, like your skill set, like you know that she can, there's definitely an opportunity for her to win. Again, I see it in the odds. I see it in the Topology picks. I will side with you, though. I do like Jessica I in this fight. Again, what have you done for me lately? And that's a terrible thing in all pro sports. But you look at that win over Araujo just a year ago. I can see a glimmer. You look at a split decision win from Calderwood over Andrea Lee, and she was supposed to get a title shot off of it, and it didn't happen. And then the Maia fight, Maia had her chances, I guess you could say, in that Shevchenko fight, more so than anybody else ever did.
She did pretty well, I would say.
She did all right, and she finished Joanne Calderwood, so it's pretty difficult to try and figure it out. But yeah, I'm going to go with Jessica I in this one as well. So we both have Evil Eye to get a win in this fight. Let us know down below in the comments who you have. Our co-main event, Chandler taking on Hooker. Our main event, Poirier taking on McGregor for a second time. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say.
Let's get into it.